Hey, welcome back to Painting Trafalgar. This is the sixth installation. So there's been five before this one, and this is number six. Here's some models that I've been working on. There's the paint that I'm using in my paintings. And some of my reference material. This book has been helpful. I've got on the other side of this wall a big library of books about the sea and stuff. And I've been working on this model, which is a 74 gun ship. And this is the HMS Victory, which I had built 25 years ago, that model. I've been a fan of the battle for a long time, and the Victory is the star of the battle, and it's the one that still remains. You can go visit the actual ship in Portsmouth; it's still there. None of the other ships are still around. All of them are gone. Most of them were gone the day after the battle. It seems like there was a huge battle. All these ships are shooting at each other. At the end of the day, the British have won, but that night and the following 10 to 14 days, there's a hurricane where the ships now. After being in a big battle and being all torn up and in some cases nearly sunk with great loss of life and all kinds of damage because they've been shooting cannon at each other all afternoon. This stuff on these ships, a lot of them were broken. So like from here up, it was very typical to have what this is called the topmast. It was very typical to have these topmasts break off. A lot of the ships were, in term, as dismasted, whereas the whole mast would fall off, all because they were getting shot up. Like if these ropes here that look like a rope ladder that's triangular, they're called the shrouds. They're all attached to the hull on this little shelf here, right? If I take a scissors and cut all this off, there's nothing to prevent this mast from falling over on that side. And during the battle, all that stuff did get shot up, and a lot of these masts just fell off because there was not that you really need all these supporting ropes to keep them from tipping over and falling. They're strong, but picture the ship at sea, it's rocking and rolling, and so if you cut the rigging up, you're going to damage the ship. And then these ships the following day are going to go into a hurricane with their rigging all torn up. There's a tragic second act to the Battle of Trafalgar that is the way each one of these individual ships that were acting as part of a greater whole. After the battle, they become individuals and are, in large part, isolated from each other and can't render assistance too much to each other. And they're all individually now fighting this common enemy that doesn't care about them, and that's the ocean and the sea and the waves. That's kind of setting up what I'm doing in my painting. This painting is a view of that lumpy, wavy sea and the damaged, dismasted ships bobbing around like corks. There's this view that I'm painting isn't too far-fetched. The following day there was terrible weather. The night came, then the next day the ships were scattered and they were trying to sail back and get in touch with one another. And as the days marched on, the various fortunes of the individual ships that were in bad shape got worse and worse, and a lot of them washed up on shore and were destroyed in as they hit the rocks. Some sank outright. Some were... Well, picture at the end of the battle, the British have won, which means the individual French and Spanish ships were striking their colors, meaning they'd haul down their national ensign. In this case, the ensign is the British flag, right? If you lower that flag, you are surrendering. So that's called striking your colors, or struck. At the end of the battle, many of these ships, particularly the ones in the center of this column, had struck and had surrendered to the English. What happens is the English ship then guys will get into a rowboat from the British ship. They'll row over to the French or Spanish ship, and then they will take over the ship, and it would be an accepted practice. The people who had surrendered would expect this. They would be not happy about it, but they would have to surrender the ship. Now the captain who had been in charge gives his sword ceremonially to the person who's taking possession of the ship. And then he just fades away. He no longer plays a role in the decision-making. The British guys who just came over in the rowboat are now in charge. But there couldn't be that many of them. So you'd have a ship that takes like 700 people to crew properly. But now you've only got about 20 or 30 people in the best circumstance, who are in charge, the British, whereas the rest of that crew would be obliged to go down below decks, and often they were forced to do it, at gunpoint to go down below. The great fear of the prize crew, of the small handful of British, would be that the crew that vastly outnumbered them would change their mind and attack them. And during this hurricane that took place, I don't remember if there were actual attacks, but there were a few specific instances where the prize crew were needed to. I'm sorry, where the surrendered crew who were below decks were needed to operate the pumps and to try to re-rig the ship, and their motivation was to stay alive, but beyond that they really didn't care because it wasn't their ship anymore. So it was a really difficult time for the prize crews, the British guys. You're cut off from your other ships. Your friendly ships are maybe visible, sometimes they're not. So you might have 20 guys on board this enemy ship, and you can't fix it yourself, and you're having difficulty just getting it to go where you want it to go. So you do have to eventually rely on those captured guys who are down below. And a lot of times those guys who were captured down below realized that they were really the ones who were in charge. All they had to do was assert themselves. And during the hurricane, this happened repeatedly, whereas these ships that the British had taken and were chalked up as these victorious prizes of the war, of the battle, actually had to be handed back over to the French and the Spanish crews. So the victory was dulled a little bit. Like, they could have brought those, if the weather had been nice, they could have sailed all those ships back to England, refurbished them, and they would add them to the Royal Navy, making the Royal Navy stronger with more ships. But the reality was that they didn't really acquire that many enemy ships because of the storm that took that away. The circumstances of the storm prevented them from fully enjoying the fruits of their victory. But those ships, very few of them actually went back into Spanish or French ports and were usable later on. Really, the battle did defeat the French and the Spanish fleets, and there wasn't really a whole lot of seagoing might left for Napoleon to use after the Battle of Trafalgar. So that's why it's counted as this terrific victory. But the complete story has this tragedy tacked onto the end of it, where all these people died in ships that went aground on the rocks or sank, who had first had to suffer through being in this terrible battle. And I guess there's like glory and everlasting fame, but it was tainted a little bit by the circumstances that happened afterwards. And that's kind of what this painting is getting at. It's hopefully when it's done, you'll see crew figures on the frigate in the foreground, and they will hopefully give off the appearance of being hard-pressed, beleaguered, and working hard to keep things intact on the ship. So they'll be hauling on ropes and things like that. Not rejoicing and singing songs, but like the work isn't done yet, and they're still in trouble. The other big part of the tragic part of Trafalgar is that Nelson died. He got shot early in the battle, and he was taken below, where he sort of lingered for about 3 hours. But at that point, he was no longer in charge. But he's remembered as the victory of Trafalgar, and rightly so, because it was his command decisions that brought about the battle in the first place. But he didn't live to see the end of the battle. And in a way, that sort of secured his fame even stronger, in a way that in which if he had lived and even fought further battles, he would not have been able to achieve the same degree of fame as having not only defeated the Franco-Spanish fleet, but also died at the height of it, which really cemented his place in the history books, because you add that element of tragedy where it's, he really becomes this terrific hero, and he doesn't get to live on decades further and then perhaps make public missteps or besmirch his own reputation. It's there, if you dig into Nelson a little bit, you'll see that like he's a hero, but he also has like these human frailties and problems in his life. There was scandal about things that he did on dry land, and he'd get back on a ship and then he'd win glory again. So conceivably, if he had lived post Trafalgar, he certainly would have fully embraced his fame and everything, but what would he have done with it? And it's easy to speculate that he kind of, I don't want to say he was better off dead because that's terrible, but knowing what we know about his past, it's also possible that he could have given himself another scandal somehow during, doing some kind of other thing that we don't want our typical heroic heroes to be caught doing. I'd hate to end on that note. I'll talk about my intentions a little bit more. This is the second or third Trafalgar painting that I've done. I still don't actually have a shot where one of the ships is shooting a cannon at one of the other ships. I'm really trying to work my way up to that point where I've got the ships in conflict. And the whole point of making this big map was to find out what were these circumstances. Like when these ships got close to each other, what were their dispositions like? Like if I was in a rowboat here and I was looking this way, would I get this the perspective on something that would make a good painting? There's a lot of these Trafalgar paintings where in the background you just see a row of ships and then puffs of smoke, and there's a sameness to them that I kind of want to avoid. I want to find, through the use of these models, I want to be able to find points of view that haven't been explored. The whole point of having these 3D models is that I can hold them in front of the camera and I can swing the camera around and look at them from different perspectives. And through that, combined with, knowing the actual dispositions of the ships, I'll be able to create interesting compositions while at the same time being able to use the compositions to demonstrate what was actually happening during the battle. And that should give me a lot of material to talk about in the upcoming videos that I intend to do as I move along. I have no idea how many of these I'll do, and I don't know how many of the Trafalgar paintings I'll do. Conceivably, I could just keep painting them, I just know that the COVID-19 lockdown has assured me that I'll be indoors for a while, and I'm going to be able to focus on this project. So I'm grateful that I've got a project that's worth digging into that'll keep me busy. Yeah, so I guess that's it. I'll talk to you guys the next time.